Hey everyone! Today, I have an incredible and emotional story to share with you. The tale of Wang Zhaojun, one of China's four great beauties, alongside Yang Gufei, Shishir, and Diaochan. Her journey took her from a small southern village to the opulent Han Dynasty palace, and eventually to the distant lands of the Xiongnu, all in the name of peace. This story is filled with beauty, intrigue, sacrifice, and plenty of tears. How did Zhaojun go from being an overlooked palace maiden to a legendary figure on the windswept plains? Was it her choice, or was she just another pawn in the game of power? Let's travel back in time and uncover the truth behind this unforgettable woman's life. Wang Zhaojun was born in the misty, picturesque water towns of the south, where the rivers glowed under the morning sun and life was simple yet peaceful. Her family made a living by farming and weaving, and she grew up surrounded by nature's beauty. But she herself was something special. Her skin was as fair as fresh snow, her eyes deep and bright like a clear lake, and her smile could melt away anyone's worries. Everyone in her village believed she was destined for greatness. And sure enough, when Emperor Yuan of Han ordered a nationwide selection for palace maidens, she was chosen. At just 16 or 17 years old, Zhaojun was filled with excitement. She thought palace life would bring her riches and honor. As she bid farewell to her family, she smiled brightly, promising, "I'll come back to see you soon." But little did she know that farewell would be forever. As she stepped into the grand palace of Chang'an, she was awestruck by the golden halls and towering pillars. However, she quickly realized she was just one among hundreds of beautiful women, all vying for the emperor's favor. She thought to herself, "Do I have a chance at this dream?" Life in the palace was anything but glamorous. Competition was fierce. Women played music, danced, and did everything they could to catch the emperor's attention. But here's the twist: beauty alone wasn't enough. The emperor didn't meet each maiden personally. Instead, he relied on portraits painted by a court artist named Mao Yanshou. Now, Mao Yanshou was no honest man. He took bribes from other palace maidens and purposely altered portraits to favor those who paid him well. Since Zhaojun refused to bribe him, he painted her with dull eyes, a lifeless expression, and even a small blemish on her cheek. When the emperor reviewed the portraits, he barely glanced at hers and dismissed her as ordinary. And just like that, one of China's most breathtaking women was left unnoticed, exiled to the forgotten corners of the palace. Days turned into months and months into years. Zhaojun tried to befriend the other palace women, but the competition and backstabbing made it impossible. Her bright, straightforward nature didn't fit the palace's cunning games. As time passed, her heart grew heavier and the dream of royal favor slowly faded away. Life in the palace felt like a never-ending cycle of waiting. The palace walls were high, the days repetitive. She embroidered, swept floors, and listened for any news from the imperial court, news that never came. Night after night, she stood by her window, staring at the moon, whispering verses of poetry she created herself. "The bright moon shines, but my heart aches for home." She missed her hometown, the misty rivers, the laughter of her family, and the warmth of a home she might never see again. One evening, she gathered the courage to ask an elderly palace servant, "Can I ever go home?" The woman sighed and shook her head. "Once you enter these gates, leaving is harder than reaching the heavens." Zhaojun's heart sank. Was this to be her fate, forgotten and trapped? Far to the north, the Xiongnu were growing restless. Their leader, the Chanyu, sent an envoy to the Han court proposing a marriage alliance. If the Han emperor sent a princess to marry the Xiongnu ruler, peace between the two nations could be secured. Emperor Yuan hesitated. Send a true princess to that barren land? That would be a loss for the empire. But rejecting the offer might provoke more conflict. Then an idea struck him. Why not choose a palace woman instead? The announcement sent a shockwave through the court. Panic spread among the palace women. Some whispered in fear, "I'd rather die than be sent to that wasteland." Others secretly saw it as a chance to escape their forgotten existence. But Zhaojun remained quiet, deep in thought. Could this be her way out? The emperor summoned all the palace women to the grand hall. His voice echoed through the chamber. Who among you is willing to marry the Chanyu of the Xiongnu and bring peace to our borderlands? The room fell dead silent. No one dared to move. The women kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact as if looking up might seal their fate. Some of them were shaking, while others held their breath. The tension was suffocating. Zhaojun stood at the back, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded. This is my chance to leave, she thought. Life in the palace was a slow death. Years spent waiting for an emperor who didn't even know she existed. She had dreamed of seeing the world beyond these walls. And if her leaving could also help bring peace, wasn't it worth considering? Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. Your Majesty, I am willing. Gasps rippled through the hall. The emperor raised an eyebrow, surprised. You? Some palace women whispered among themselves. Is she brave or just crazy? Others murmured. The emperor studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Prepare for your journey. Zhaojun bowed deeply, her heart steady. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. Before her departure, Zhaojun was summoned to formally meet the emperor for the first time. Dressed in elegant but simple robes, she walked into the grand hall, her head held high. The moment Emperor Yuan laid eyes on her, he froze. She was breathtaking, her beauty radiant yet serene, carrying a dignity he had never seen in any of his consorts. His shock turned to fury. What is the meaning of this? He bellowed, slamming his hand against the armrest of his throne. Why was I never shown this woman before? The officials and palace attendants cowered. One finally spoke, voice trembling. Your Majesty, it was Mao Yanshou. He altered her portrait. The emperor's face darkened. Mao Yanshou? The painter. The truth spilled out. Mao Yanshou had taken bribes from other women to paint them favorably while deliberately making Zhaojun's portrait plain and lifeless. Enraged, the emperor ordered Mao Yanshou's immediate execution. But as the guards dragged him away, Zhaojun remained calm. What was done was done. Your Majesty, she said softly, my fate has already been decided. There is no need for regret. The emperor clenched his fists. He wanted to stop her, to change her fate. But the Xiongnu envoy was waiting, and the peace treaty had been sealed. He could do nothing but watch her walk away, feeling a loss he hadn't even known he could feel. Zhaojun climbed into the carriage that would take her north. As the wheels turned, the grand palace, the place that had been both her prison and her home, began to shrink in the distance. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. This was her choice. She wouldn't look back. At the palace gates, a group of palace women gathered to watch her leave. Some wept openly. How could such a kind and beautiful woman be sent away? An elderly palace maid pressed a small package into her hands. These are cakes from Chang'an, she whispered. A taste of home for the journey. Zhaojun squeezed her hand in gratitude. Then, as the carriage rolled forward, she whispered, Goodbye, Chang'an. The journey north was long and grueling. The roads became rougher, the air colder. The lush green landscapes of the south faded into barren, windswept plains. When she finally arrived, she stepped out of the carriage and gasped. This was nothing like the grandeur of Chang'an. The sky stretched endlessly, and the wind carried the scent of dust and animals. Warriors in heavy fur cloaks watched her with curiosity. Horses and camels roamed freely. One of the Xiongnu guards handed her a strip of dried meat. She chewed cautiously. It was tough and unfamiliar. I have to adjust, she thought. This is my life now. In the distance, she saw a procession approaching. The Chanyu himself was coming to meet her. The Chanyu dismounted from his horse. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and piercing eyes. Unlike what she expected, there was no arrogance in his gaze, only curiosity. So, he said, studying her, this is the woman the Han Emperor has sent. Zhaojun met his gaze without fear. I am Wang Zhaojun, she said calmly. I come in peace." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then peace is what we shall have." Life among the Xiongnu was a shock. The people lived in tents, moving with the seasons. Meals consisted of roasted meat and fermented milk. The air was crisp but carried the ever-present sound of galloping hooves. Determined to adapt, Zhaojun learned their language, their customs. She practiced riding horses, falling off countless times before mastering it. She even tried archery, surprising many with her determination. At night, she shared stories of Chang'an with the children, painting pictures of rivers, lotuses, and delicate silk garments. In return, they told her about the spirits of the steppe and the legends of their ancestors. Over time, the Xiongnu people began calling her Ninghu Gongzhu, the princess who brings peace. Over time, Zhaojun became more than just the wife of the Chanyu. She became a key figure in diplomacy between the Xiongnu and the Han Dynasty. Unlike previous political marriages that were mere symbolic gestures, she actively participated in discussions between the two sides, advocating for peaceful trade and cooperation instead of conflict. When disputes arose over border crossings and trade routes, it was Zhaojun who wrote to the Han court, urging them to send grain, cloth, and tools instead of soldiers and weapons. "A war benefits no one," she argued. "Trade enriches both nations." Her words carried weight, not just because she was a Han woman, but because she had earned the respect of the Xiongnu as their queen. Her presence brought stability. The once constant raids and skirmishes along the frontier diminished, and for the first time in decades, both the Han and Xiongnu people could breathe easier. Caravan routes became safer, merchants prospered, and families no longer lived in fear of sudden attacks. But Zhaojun knew peace was fragile. It depended on the goodwill of rulers, and rulers changed. She could only hope that her efforts would last beyond her lifetime. Years passed, and Zhaojun fully embraced her new life. She bore children, giving the Chanyu sons and daughters who carried both Han and Xiongnu blood. This further strengthened her position, making her more than just a foreign consort. She was the mother of the next generation of rulers. The Xiongnu people admired her not just for her beauty, but for her wisdom. She learned their customs, rode alongside them on horseback, and even participated in ceremonies honoring their ancestors. When disputes broke out among different clans, it was often Zhaojun who mediated, using her knowledge of Han diplomacy to resolve conflicts without bloodshed. Despite her growing influence, she never forgot her homeland. At night, under the vast northern sky, she would sit by a fire and hum old Chang'an melodies. The steppe children would gather around her, fascinated by stories of lotus ponds, silk markets, and the misty rivers of the south. They would ask, "Is it really as beautiful as you say?" She would smile, eyes full of longing. "Even more beautiful." But she no longer spoke of returning. She knew the road home was one she would never take. Though she had carved out a meaningful life, Zhaojun could never shake the deep, aching loneliness that crept in on quiet nights. No matter how much she adapted, she would always be a woman caught between two worlds. She kept a pipa, a four-stringed lute she had brought from Chang'an. On nights when the wind howled through the tents, she would sit alone, strumming soft, sorrowful tunes. The sound was unlike anything the Xiongnu had ever heard, melancholy yet mesmerizing. One night, the Chanyu found her playing under the stars. "You always look toward the south when you play," he observed. She stopped, fingers resting on the strings. "I was just remembering home." He sighed. "You are respected here. Loved. Yet your heart still belongs to a place that abandoned you." She gave him a sad smile. "Some roots run too deep to be cut." He said nothing more. Instead, he sat beside her, listening to her music. He knew he could never replace what she had lost, but he could at least sit with her in the silence. Years passed, and the Chanyu fell gravely ill. His violent coughing fits left him breathless, and before long he succumbed to his illness. With his passing, the entire Xiongnu court was thrown into chaos. His sons, brothers, and other nobles all vied for power, each eager to claim the throne. Heated arguments escalated to the point where swords were nearly drawn. Zhaojun watched the scene unfold before her, her heart pounding with anxiety, as though she were an ant scurrying on a hot pan. She knew that if the internal conflict spiraled out of control, the fragile peace she had worked so hard to maintain would collapse, and war would once again break out along the borders. Desperately, she tried to reason with them, saying, "While the Chanyu was alive, he kept the realm united. Do not let his efforts go to waste." But her words fell on deaf ears. Ambition and rivalry clouded their judgment. That night, she lay awake, cradling her child in her arms, her mind filled with fear. If war broke out again, everything she had endured, every sacrifice she had made, would be in vain. Staring into the darkness of her tent, she murmured to herself, "What am I supposed to do now?" In the end, the power struggle came to a conclusion. The late Chanyu's eldest son emerged victorious and took his father's place as the new ruler of the Xiongnu. According to their customs, Zhaojun, who had been the wife of the previous Chanyu, was now required to marry the new one. It was their tradition, an unbreakable law, and she had no say in the matter. When she heard the news, she froze. Her mind reeled. Again? She had already been sent away from her homeland to secure peace, and now, once more, she was being used as a political tool. But resistance was futile. The Xiongnu elders and nobles watched her expectantly. Her child clung to the hem of her robe, sensing her hesitation. She had no choice. Clenching her fists, she forced herself to nod in acceptance. On the night of the wedding, the camp was alive with celebration. The great tent was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of roasted meat. Flames from the torches flickered in the wind, casting dancing shadows on the revelers. It should have been a night of joy, but Zhaojun felt nothing. Dressed in an ornate red robe, she lowered her head and took a sip of the ceremonial wine, the bitter taste lingering on her tongue. Memories of the late Chanyu filled her mind. She could still hear his voice, see his face. She let out a silent, bitter laugh. So this is my fate? A tool for peace, passed from one ruler to the next? The new Chanyu treated her well, offering kindness and respect. But it didn't matter. Her heart had grown cold. She had long stopped dreaming of happiness. The only thing that remained was her duty to keep the peace, to prevent another war from erupting, no matter the cost. Back in the Han Dynasty, time moved on, and so did the emperor's interests. The court that once traded Zhaojun for peace had long stopped asking about her. No letters arrived from Chang'an. No envoys came to check on her well-being. To them, she was a deal made and forgotten. Standing on the vast plains of the Xiongnu, she would often gaze southward, watching the horizon where China lay. The wind howled through the grasslands, whispering memories of home. Her father's voice, the warmth of Chang'an's rivers, the laughter of her childhood friends. But those days were long gone. Still, she did not let sorrow consume her. She focused on what she could control, advising the Chanyu, strengthening diplomatic ties, ensuring peace for her children and the people she had grown to care for. Yet, deep inside, she knew the Han court had abandoned her. She was alone in this foreign land, forever a daughter of China in a place that would never be home. Years passed, and Zhaojun, once the young and radiant maiden of the Han court, now felt the weight of time pressing on her. Her body weakened and illness crept in. The harsh winters of the steppe, the endless dust storms, and the years of heartache had taken their toll. As she lay in her tent, wrapped in thick furs, she could hear the muffled cries of the people outside. Her children sat beside her, holding her hands. The Chanyu, now older and wiser, sat silently, his face shadowed with grief. She knew her time had come. With great effort, she whispered, "Promise me no more war. Keep the peace." Her fingers tightened weakly around her son's hand. "That is my last wish." Tears welled up in their eyes as they nodded. The Xiongnu, who once saw her as a foreigner, now mourned her as their own. As the night deepened, Zhaojun closed her eyes one last time. In her final moments, she dreamed of home, of the lotus-filled lakes, the soft Jiangnan rain, and the voices of those she left behind. The Xiongnu buried her on the vast grasslands she had come to call home. Over time, a strange phenomenon occurred. While the steppe was barren and dry, the grass atop her tomb grew lush and green, even through the harshest winters. The people began calling it Qingzhong, the Green Mound, believing that her spirit still blessed the land. Travelers passing by would stop to pay their respects. The Xiongnu sang songs in her honor, and even in the Han Dynasty, her name was whispered in poems and ballads. She was neither fully Xiongnu nor fully Han anymore. She was something greater, a symbol of sacrifice, of peace, of what it meant to bridge two worlds. As the years turned to centuries, Zhaojun's story became legend. Some called her a tragic heroine, a woman sacrificed by politics. Others saw her as a true diplomat, a woman who turned fate into something meaningful. Paintings depicted her riding into the northern winds, a figure of beauty and sorrow. Poets wrote of her tears beneath the moon, longing for home. Dramas and operas brought her tale to life, each retelling adding new layers to her myth. Even today, historians debate, was she a victim or a visionary? Was she merely a pawn, or did she hold the brush that wrote her own destiny? Regardless of the answer, her name endured, carried by time and memory. And so, we come to the end of Wang Zhaojun's story. From a simple village girl to a palace maiden, from a forgotten beauty to a queen of the steppe, her journey was one of sacrifice, strength, and quiet resilience. Was she a hero, a victim, or something in between? That is for us to decide. But one thing is certain, she changed history. One woman, one choice, and decades of peace followed. And though she may have been forgotten by the court that sent her away, she was never forgotten by the people whose lives she touched. Thank you for joining me on this journey. What do you think of Wang Zhaojun's fate? Was her sacrifice worth it? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, let's keep uncovering the untold stories of history.